After tomorrow, then, will all casuals who get COVID and stay home not be able to receive any payments from the government? What's the situation with that?
No, there appears to still be a small cohort that will continue to receive payments working within health and disability and other sectors, but the majority will not.
Right. So what are the rules now about staying away from work if you are COVID positive? Is it at the person's discretion, or what's the situation there?
It will be at the employer's discretion, more likely, in that employers may set rules on whether you have to stay home while you're symptomatic, whether you have to stay home for a particular set of days. The government has relaxed its rules, but that doesn't mean that employers don't still have obligations to maintain a safe workplace.
Yeah, so there is a real risk, is there, that casual workers who don't receive any funds, if they stay home, will hide any COVID symptoms, still go to work, because otherwise, of course, they lose out financially.
Exactly. If the choice is, do I make rent for the end of the week or do I stay at home, a casual worker who doesn't want to create an unsafe environment, doesn't want to hinder their own health, doesn't want to impact the health of others, but might have no choice but to attend work if otherwise they're not going to make ends meet. You could see why a worker like that might still go to work if they're suffering COVID.
So what about the duty of care issue then that you mentioned? Will employers be liable if other people contract COVID from their colleagues? How does the situation impact an employer's duty to run a safe workplace?
Well, an employer has a duty to maintain a safe workplace, and they can't simply rely upon the federal government's relaxing of standards. They've got to make their own assessment, and each workplace is different. And of course, in some workplaces, the risk of transmission might be much higher and the vulnerability of the workforce might be higher. So the employer will have to make an assessment. It might be they have to apply more stringent standard. Otherwise, an employee who contracts COVID at work and perhaps has a serious long-term illness might allege that the employer was negligent in not having a safe system of work by not adopting a more stringent standard.
So should the rules be different then for workplaces where workers constantly come into contact with the public, like hospitality venues or retail outlets?
In a sense, the duty of care is always dependent on the particular type of workplace. So it's not that you need a different rule, it's just that the employer has to ensure that they maintain the right standard to ensure their duty of care is met, depending on the particular circumstances of the workplace.
So you said that aged care workers and health workers will continue to get some form of payment if they do stay home, if they contract COVID. How much will they get?
I think they get the same minimum payment, the $750 that has already been in place. That will continue.
So overall then, could this be a push for companies to move people from casual to permanent part-time or full-time? And are some companies doing just that?
Well, what we've seen in the last 2 decades is an enormous increase in casualisation of the workforce. And that leads to certain structural problems which get exposed by things. And the pandemic exposed to structural problems in that people in precarious work can't fall back on sick leave. And when you've got a pandemic and you're saying to people to stay at home, remember initially it was 14 days, you've got to have something in place, a safety net in place. And I think that's certainly been exposed. And I would hope that part of the response to COVID, the industrial relations and employment response to COVID, is a move away from casualisation and towards more secure work. Particularly when you bear in mind it was casual workers like gig economy workers, those that were delivering food to your doorstep because you couldn't leave your house. They're the ones that were the most precarious and are most affected by casualisation of the workforce.
So if a worker contracts COVID, they suspect from a colleague, and that original worker has to stay home because they're too ill to go to work, what action can they take against the employer?
It really will depend on how badly the COVID affects them. I mean, if you're only off work for a day or 2 or 3, then it's unlikely you'll actually be able to take any action because you may have been able to utilise sick leave. I think the issue will be if you develop something significant and you say, well, actually the employer should have a more stringent standard in place, you may be able to make a workers' compensation claim. You may also have a common law claim in negligence, but it will very much turn on the circumstances of what happened and how badly you've been affected and how long you're unable to work.